Fela Anikulapo Kuti, the most persecuted artist of all time. Father, musician, and activist, arrested over 200 times. But why were his ideologies frowned upon by the Nigerian government? Well, for that, we'll have to go all the way back to the start.
Now, there has not been anybody in this whole politics in Africa. Only two people have walked on the street to follow people to where they are going. Nkrumah and my mother. What are you talking about?
Threw his mother from the window. They now took Fela, held him, soldiers, held him like that, and they were flogging him naked, bleeding profusely, naked all the way to Abalti barracks.
Olufela Olusegun Oladotun Ransom Kuti, born 15th October 1938 to a middle-class family. His father, a clergyman, and his mother, Fumilayo Ransom Kuti, a famous feminist activist herself, and a good associate of the famous Ghanaian Kwame Nkrumah. He was born in Abeokuta, Ogun State, Nigeria. Coming from a very ambitious family, his parents had big plans for him to study medicine in England. From a very young age, Fela had always been musically inclined, learning to play the piano, and he had a keen eye for everything music. This was a very noticeable trait of his, and his mother, being a very influential figure in the new rising movement that was Pan-Africanism, was greatly influential to his doctrines, which naturally flowed into his music, and he will eventually pay for this dearly. But staying on track, fast forward to 1955, 5 years before the independence of Nigeria from the British colonial rule, the Ransom Kuti family was struck with the devastation of the death of their father, Israel Oladotun Ransom Kuti. Shortly after, he was sent to England by his mother to study medicine, and this is where his musical journey started. You see, Fela was a very strong-willed person. Some might even call him stubborn. Even at a young age, he knew what he wanted and where he was headed, and nothing was going to come in the way of him and his dreams. Absolutely nothing and no one, not even the fear of death. Fela did not fear death. Death feared him, hence his nickname, Anikulapo, the one who holds death in his pouch. Shortly after his arrival in England, he decided against studying medicine, opting to study music at the Trinity College of Music. Here, he would greatly improve his musical skills and start developing his own style, getting his inspiration from a mix of traditional African percussions, Ghanaian highlife, and traditional Yoruba folk sounds. He would form his own band, calling it the Kula Lobitos, and together they would gain some significant traction down the years. Fela wasn't just all music though. The year is 1962, and by this time, Fela had been married to a young Nigerian lady, Remi Lekun Taylor. They got married in 1960, and by 1962, they had 2 children together, Yeni Kuti and Femi Kuti. You may know Femi Kuti. He eventually became the heir to his father's throne. The following year, they returned to Nigeria, where Fela continued his musical career, forming a new band. Being back home gave Fela newfound energy for his musical passion. Living in England had taught him that he was a black man, and as ridiculous as it sounded, prior to his studies in England, he never questioned his race or skin color. He was just human. But struggles in England had taught him that although he may have been human in his home, he wasn't seen as one everywhere. Fela believed that to be good at something, you had to practice and keep practicing till you mastered it. Talent could only get you so far, and so he and his band practiced rigorously, perfecting their musical skills. This act of perfectionism would come at a great loss. His wife, Remi, could no longer stand his packed schedule, and the duo decided to part ways. These were quite dark times for Fela. In addition to losing his partner, Fela's stocks went lower and lower every day, as Nigerians and the type of music they listened to was rapidly changing. In addition to all this, Nigeria was plunged into a great civil war in the late 1960s, a war described by many as the first televised mass genocide, a war which we have also covered on this channel. All these events led to Fela and his band going on a 10-month hiatus to the United States of America, where he was exposed to the works of famous Black Americans like Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., Frederick Douglass, and the likes. This would further reinforce his views on what being black was and the oppression of the black man everywhere he went. And upon arriving in Nigeria, Fela would take a big decision to write songs about the things he had learnt, about oppression, colonial mindset, mental slavery, and corruption, things that Nigeria was faced with and which had been amplified even more greatly by the war and the destruction it had left behind. Fela was reborn again. He was back, and this time, 10 times stronger. This new path of his would land him in trouble with the government, as he was directly using his songs and fame as a media to oppose the corrupt leaders in Nigeria. Over 200 times he was arrested and jailed, some sentences shorter than others. At one point, he spent up to 18 months in prison. At his abode, which he eventually named Kalakuta, after one of the prisons in which he had been detained at, he housed over 25 young ladies there, some of which were daughters of influential men in power, the same people he sang against. Of course, housing his very own enemies' daughters did nothing to help his popularity amongst the people in power who already held great grudges against him and his music. This led to Kalakuta being raided several times by soldiers, leading him to declare it a breakaway state, of which he was the head of state. This was no joke to him. He truly ran the place like an independent state, having a government structure and even structure of passing out judgment, as was narrated by one of his disciples, Lemmy, in an interview with CGTN Africa. All this drama and his passion for the freedom of his people from the Western oppressors and their ruling brothers made Fela even more famous than he ever was, and not just in his home country, but also internationally, making aware to the international audience the atrocities committed by the Nigerian government on its own people. He even made Nigerians aware of things they didn't even know they had to be aware of, as illustrated in his famous work, Suffering and Smiling. The government did everything in their power to tarnish his image, as he had tarnished theirs, but with each passing day, Fela grew more and more famous, and their schemes against him backfired, arguably amplifying what he sang about in his songs. Through all this, there was one person who was constantly at his side, encouraging him on, his mother, Fumilayo. She was with him every step of the way, until she wasn't. Calamity befell Kalakuta. The anger and the rage of the government fell from the heavens onto Kalakuta. February 18th, 1977, Fela's Kalakuta was raided by army officers. You see, Fela had just recently released a song called Zombie, in which he heavily criticized the ignorant and even brainless ways the soldiers obeyed brutal orders given by Olusegun Obasanjo, a behavior likened to that of a zombie. Obasanjo, clearly not amused by this act, sent officers to raid Kalakuta. They went in and they stripped everyone naked and beat them mercilessly. They then threw his mother out of the window, and she would eventually die the following year from injuries sustained during this attack. Fela's world was burning to ashes, and quite literally, they set the place ablaze. But they were not done yet. They grabbed Fela by his arms, stripped him naked, and whipped him all the way from Kalakuta to the barracks where they held him. And in all this was still not the end of Fela. He would continue to play his music and sing against the oppression of the black man up until his death on the 2nd of August, 1997, aged 50.